Hey friends, why don't you come sit in this cozy corner with me and let's just have a little conversation about tiny griefs. Welcome back to Heartscapes, where we're learning the system of Reiki to live lives that are rooted, spacious, connected, lives that are well provisioned for their journey home to ourselves. My name's Michaela. Welcome back to the studio. I'm over here in the cozy corner today. It's just a day to sit in a big pile of pillows and get warm and comfortable. And just sit down and have this conversation that has been on my mind and that also just came up really strongly today in a group that I lead that explores the relationship between practicing the system of Reiki and the experiences of grief and looks at, what does the system of Reiki offer us in terms of navigating grief as a healing pathway and for challenging the ways in which grief is vastly misunderstood and treated in ways that don't serve us well in our culture. It's a little bit of a heavy topic generally, but there's a lot of joy in the conversations that happen in these spaces that we have quarterly. And moving into the winter time, we're about a week away from the winter solstice. It's really a very present conversation because the winter is a time when people tend to be more present to their grief. A lot of loss happens in the winter time, and the stillness and kind of introspection and slowing down of the winter also invites us to be more reflective about the places in our life where we might be carrying grief. So it's a really powerful time and an important time to be in not only the conversation, but be in practices that help us to digest and move those experiences through our body. It's really, it's a profound truth that the experience of grieving can be a healing experience. And that unfortunately, our culture is very averse to being in deep process with grief. And we don't understand it well, and we tend to want to avoid it. But truly what we're trying to avoid is the losses that inspired that grief. The grief itself can be a really powerful experience. So all of that to say, we were in this conversation today, and one of the themes that came through really strongly is a really important one to bring into this conversation, and one that can get overlooked. Because often when we're talking about grief, we're talking about the really big things, right? Times when people in our life have died, or significant relationships have totally ended, or major transitions in our life have brought a sense of loss and grief to us. And these, of course, are really important moments to mark and to know how to navigate well. But the thing is, those aren't the only griefs that we experience. And we do ourselves a disservice and we misunderstand the way that life works in a certain sense when we ignore the fact that change is constant, right? We have phrases like the only, sure thing in this life is change, that change is a constant. The impeccable Octavia Butler tells us that God is change. That the only thing constant is the turning of things over, which means that loss is a constant in our experience. That transitions will inevitably mean the ending of something. And sometimes those endings can seem very insignificant. And we might ignore them, or we might not notice them, or we might notice them, but we might feel a little bit ashamed to acknowledge that we're feeling some sadness or some grief over something that seems insignificant. But what happens when we do that, firstly, it's happening all the time, right? Again, there's constantly these moments of loss and change and transition in life, therefore opportunities for tiny little griefs. But when we do that, when we ignore them, turn away from them, feel ashamed of them, they tend to back up in our system. It's like we're adding a little pebble of grief, a little pebble of weight, something that we've taken into our system that remains undigested in a sense, and it builds up over time. I know I have had the experience, perhaps you have had the experience of, being at a low point, maybe feeling a little sad or a little sick, or, some other reason that our system is feeling kind of impacted and not very well. And in that moment, we're kind of vulnerable and can get flooded with, these old feelings, these, memories of these small moments. And it can be very confusing because we're like, why am I still upset about that, one tiny thing, that change. Why am I so upset about, the fact that, this relationship ended that only lasted 2 weeks anyway? Why am I so sad that, I missed this job opportunity for a job I didn't even want? Why am I so upset that, it's going to take me longer to do something because I sprained my ankle? Like just these tiny little things um, that we dismiss, and they can come flooding back to us. And in particular, in moments when we do experience a big grief, a large loss that comes through, something that really does demand our attention and our time to work through. All of a sudden, that large loss, that big grief, is now compounded by all these tiny ones that we've been carrying around and not really dealing with, not processing, not allowing to move through our body to digest and to move out. And this metaphor of digestion, I think, is really valuable when we're thinking about emotions generally, but particularly grief. It's, we take something in its raw form, this experience that happens in its raw form. And our system has to process it, has to do something with it because it's impacting us. There's no way to avoid that it is now in us and it has to be dealt with. And part of dealing with that is drawing out whatever value there might be in that experience. So that might be learning something. It might be, having a profound emotional moment. It might be feeling a connection to somebody or to something that we hadn't noticed before. It could be, a sense of caution that we develop that's helpful to us in the future. Many, many different things that can be of value to us that we can pull from these experiences when we allow them to process. And then, of course, parts that we really need to allow to pass through us and be expelled and no longer be with us at all, so that we can come back into a state of integration and neutrality when it comes to that experience. When we hold on to them and we don't digest them, then they become like a toxin in our system, something that hasn't been processed, something that the gifts and the value of that thing are bound up and unavailable, and the parts that are really not ours to carry that need to be expelled, they stagnate inside of ourselves. And when we have those big griefs, all of that can come flooding in. All of a sudden, okay, process all of it because you're grieving. And that can be incredibly overwhelming. We were working today in our conversation with the 4th Reiki precepts, the way that these gatherings are structured. And we've been holding these gatherings, me and a group of Reiki practitioners, for going on 3 years now. And at a certain point, we transitioned from meeting monthly to meeting quarterly. So we meet around the solstice and the equinox of each season. And we work with the energy of that season. And then we also work with one of the Reiki precepts. And so this season, it was working with winter and working with the 4th precept, which can be translated in various ways. The two that we work with the most often in our practice is just for today, I am diligent. And just for today, I am true to my way and my being. And we had a really valuable conversation about the way in which this precept in both of those forms can really help us to work with this idea of tiny griefs and the responsibility that each of us has really to be aware of these moments where we need to acknowledge something that has impacted us and make some gesture, take some action, maybe hold a little tiny ritual, a little tiny practice, just put a little bit of space and acknowledgement around that thing so that it can digest and move on and not be something that we're carrying anymore. Similarly, the way in which we can do that for each other. There's this thread in our conversation around the responsibility of any of us who have gained a tool or a sense of wisdom or a sense of insight or, anything of value that can help us to live a more resourced, provisioned life, and the responsibility that we have to share that with each other in ways that are appropriate and available to us. And so, thinking about the 4th precept, just for today, I am true to my way and my being. It's such a powerful precept and one that's a little bit more esoteric than the others. I've talked about it in other videos. It's one that opens up a lot of mystery and a lot of inquiry. Generally, though, how you can understand that precept, you have these two parts of it, being true to your way and true to your being. What's the difference between those two things? Our way is our individual sovereign life. My life in this body, in this time period, that has a collection of experiences, of insights, of thoughts and memories, of decisions that I've made, all of the relationships in my life, all the things that I've done, my life as a discrete and sovereign experience that I call Michaela, living in this time and this place. And that life has needs, right? We have, you know, lessons to learn and decisions to make and things that we need to experience and process. And this precept invites us to be true to ourselves inside of that way, inside of those steps that we're taking in our life. And in each moment, there's a discernment to make about what does it mean right now to be true to myself. There's also an implication that's referenced from the other precepts that being true to our own way also involves being in good integrity with the people that we're in relationship with, right? So it's not an invitation into reckless self-interest, right? It's not an invitation into just doing whatever it is that you want. Being true to myself means doing whatever I want without regard for other people. That's not what it's inviting us into, because that wouldn't ultimately actually be what's best for us, to just disregard the people around us, right? There's a subtlety there, that being true to ourselves means finding this balance point of integrity between honoring what we need, speaking for that, but speaking for it with compassion for ourselves and for other people, which is the fifth precept. Speaking to those needs, getting those needs met, being true to ourselves, unattached to fear and to anger, which is the first two precepts, and rooted in gratitude as much as we can, which is the third precept. So they kind of create this ecosystem with how to understand what it means to be true to ourselves in any given moment. On the other side of that precept, being true to our being. And this is where it gets mystical, right? Because if we think about the Buddhist roots of the system of Reiki, there's a strong perspective of interconnection and of the web of life as one interconnected being, energy, entity. And that our individual life, as much as we feel the sovereignty of it and the individuality of it, is actually part of this wider web of life, that our life is an expression of life with a capital L, and that it is intrinsically interconnected, that we can't actually do anything completely independent of the rest of life, that everything that we do and everything that we engage with is connected to everything else. And that experience of our being is something that we have access to. And, the practices in the system of Reiki are designed to bring us into contact and into memory, remembrance of that being, that interconnected being. And being true to both our way and our being can feel challenging. It can feel, sometimes it feels like they're in conflict with each other. But if we kind of ease into this idea that we have these two ways, at least two ways of experiencing reality, we have the relative reality of our daily life, our way, and we have the ultimate reality of our being, which has us, interconnected to all of life, that, this becomes a dance that we play in our practice of feeling into how to be true to both of these places. And if we kind of bring that precept into the context of grief and tiny griefs, it becomes a really powerful point of focus and point of contemplation. This idea of what does it mean to be true to myself, true to my way, and true to the ultimate reality of interconnection when we experience these tiny griefs. And so there are simple practices that we can do to work with that. And the importance of the other way of translating this precept that we work with also is present, which is just for today, I am diligent. Diligent in what way? Well, diligent in my practice of being true to myself, right? So it often comes up in conversations that the word diligent can have these kind of hard work connotations. It can have these capitalistic connotations of, work diligently, work hard. So we can release those connotations, but we can also think of it as consistency, right? Just for today, I am consistent. I am diligently practicing being true to myself. I am diligently practicing being compassionate with myself and others, being grateful, releasing attachment to my fear and my anger. That is the place that the precepts are inviting us to experience diligence and consistency. And so when these tiny little griefs come up, there are some things that happen that can take us out of being true to ourselves. Let me give you an example. This came up with every single person in our conversation today. A feeling of shame or guilt about indulging in working through tiny griefs. So something that seems like not a big deal happens, or, just kind of an everyday thing, but it impacts you as a loss. And there's a tiny grief there. And it's not a big deal thing, right? And yet there's this feeling, this nagging, this like tugging at your heart, because there is actually grief there that is asking to be processed, to be digested, to be acknowledged. But because it feels like it's not a big deal, it feels like it would be an interruption to the flow of life, to getting my work done, to handling my business, to doing my responsibilities, whatever it is, to pause and to kind of deal with that or to acknowledge that. We see this in our language all the time. You ask somebody, how are you doing? And they're like, oh, I'm feeling a little bummed out, XYZ happened, but it's not really that big of a deal. I should probably just get over it. But should you though? Just get over it? What does that even mean, to just get over something that's impacting you, that's making you sad, right? We can't just choose to get over it. If we could, there'd be a lot less suffering in the world, right? If we could just be like, I'm going to choose not to be sad about that. Move on with my day. The fact is, you're sad. The fact is, there's loss, there's grief, there's frustration, there's disappointment, right? And we can't just pluck that out of our system and toss it away because it's inconvenient or we feel ashamed of it, right? And yet there is this shame and there is this tendency to stuff those experiences. And as we've already said, those become undigested toxins in our system that build up and up and up and up and up over time, causing bigger problems for us. So what would it look like to, when we have a moment like that, either, we catch it in ourselves or we catch it with another person, or we do feel some of those things and we're trying to cast it aside. What might it look like to just pause and ask, what does it mean to be true to myself around this? What does it mean to be true to my way, right? I'm walking my path, I'm walking my way, and this thing has happened and it's interrupting the flow of my mind and my feelings, and it's asking for some attention. If we just paused in that moment and just said, hey, how do I actually feel about this? Right? What are the actual feelings that are here? Oh, there's some disappointment. Oh, there's some frustration. There's some sadness. Oh, there's some shame about the fact that I'm feeling this way about this dumb thing. Right? What's underneath that? Oh, maybe there's some fear, because I didn't want to lose that thing, and maybe I'm going to lose more things in the future, and there's some fear about that. Maybe there's a little anger. I'm angry that this thing happened. I don't want to acknowledge that, right? So taking a moment to just kind of work through some of the layers of how we actually feel about the thing. It doesn't have to take a long time. And the more we practice, we keep always going back in these conversations on this channel to the value of that diligent, consistent practice, because then we become much more fluent with the process. It becomes quicker. So it doesn't have to take long. Sift through, how does it feel? And then the important next question, what do I need? So given that I feel these things, what is it that I actually need? Right? Oh, I need to acknowledge that I'm feeling this way. I need to maybe talk to somebody about it or write it down in a journal. I need to express something to somebody about this situation. I need to give myself a little self-care. I need a little rest. I need to take a bath. I need to drink some water, right? Basic care. I need to celebrate. I need to celebrate something, some aspect of this that is asking to be acknowledged, right? What is it that I actually need? Okay. Next question. What is one achievable, in other words, small enough to be achieved in this time, thing that I can do to help meet that need? Right? And I phrase it that way intentionally, right? Small enough to be achievable because we can't always meet the biggest need, right? Sometimes we discover a need that we can't meet it in that moment, right? But if we can make some gesture towards it, we can meet it in some small way, or we can meet some small aspect of it. That first of all indicates to our system that we're paying attention, right? It rewards ourself for being honest about how we feel and what we need. That makes it more likely that we can access those thoughts and those feelings again in the future. And it moves us in the direction of getting that bigger need met. It makes us more likely to take the next step closer to getting that need met, and maybe the next step after that. Because change is constant. And we can operationalize that, we can intentionalize that by making small changes intentionally. Tiny little changes, tiny little responses to what we're experiencing. And in those responses, that is how we are digesting the grief. That is how we're processing the experience, letting it reveal the gifts that it has for us, and letting go and expelling the toxins and the garbage that we don't need to be holding on to, right? It's actually quite simple, right? It can feel like a confusing question, right? How do you process some tiny little grief that just came up? It's actually simple. We acknowledge it. We notice how we're feeling about it. We ask ourselves what we need and get some sense of that. We might not know the whole answer to that question, but getting in the practice of asking. And then we take some action. We make some gesture in the direction of what we've learned about what we need. And then we do that again if we need to, right? It's a process of digestion of these little tiny experiences that helps them to, first of all, provide the value that they have for us, right? Because even difficult experiences, especially difficult experiences, have quite a bit of value often to offer us. Even if that value is primarily offered in the experience of letting it process, right? That I don't want to imply that bad things happening to us are good, and we shouldn't, we should be grateful for the bad things that happen because it look for the gift always, right? I'm not trying to use this as a way to spiritually bypass us into, always thinking there has to be some benefit. I am saying that when we digest the difficult experience, right, any piece of it that is of value to us becomes accessible, and the parts that are not can move on, right? And that's an incredibly valuable and important process for us to be in, for ourselves and for others. Sometimes it's as simple as pausing, acknowledging the feeling, taking a deep breath, and then moving on. Right? It can be that simple, or there might be more layers of complexity to it. So I want to invite you into that process. First of all, into that acknowledgement that this is important, that this is actually how bigger change gets made in our life and in our communities and in the world. That this skill of being able to discern and respond to small changes and impacts that are happening all the time can have a tremendous impact, not only on our well-being and our sense of resilience and resourcefulness and peace and joy, but also on the ways in which we impact the people around us, the amount of resources and joy that our communities have. And if we choose, and this is another invitation, maybe a challenge to you, we can invite other people into this process. We can become attuned to that language of dismissal. When we hear someone say something like, I'm a little bit bummed out today because XYZ happened, but that's not a big deal, I should get over it. Right? If we hear anything like that coming from somebody else, if we have any capacity and any access to taking a moment to just say, hey, you don't have to let it go. I'm sorry that happened. Can I give you a hug? Can I take a minute to breathe with you? Just want to acknowledge that sounds like that kind of sucked and I'm sorry. Right? Let me know if you need anything. Be kind to yourself. Is there something you could do for yourself later to just kind of help soothe that place that feels sad? Just tiny little interactions and invitations that we can interrupt this pattern of stuffing and repressing these experiences that happen all the time that we say don't matter, but they do. They do. And by encouraging ourselves and others to be with them in a different, more healthy, more robust way with more nuance and with a attention and an attitude towards healing, towards grief as an experience of healing, not an inconvenience or just an experience of suffering. Friends, this is the kind of stuff that changes our lives. That might be a dramatic thing to say, but it's just true. I just know that. I've been on this planet 47 years, which is just a tiny speck of time in the planet's lifetime, but it's a piece of time in a human life. And I can tell you that these practices and these perspectives and these ways of moving through your life and moving through the world and moving with each other has profound impact on our well-being and our lives. So I offer that to you. Honor and respect your tiny griefs. Work with them. Cultivate a habit of being with them, of taking a moment, creating tiny little rituals of processing with yourself and with others, becoming attuned to how you actually feel about things in the moment and what you actually need. You'll find that those needs are really quite simple. When it comes down to it, our fundamental needs around these things are quite simple. They become difficult when we habitualize ignoring them. It becomes difficult to actually act on those needs. But we don't have to do that. We can make a different choice. The system of Reiki helps us. Many systems of practice are there to help us. Our friends are there to help us, the trusted, cozy ones. People that will really listen are valuable. So take that into your day. Let me know what you think about that. If there's a tiny little grief that you're carrying that you want to name, feel free to do so in the comments section or drop me a message and let me know what's on your mind. If you have practiced moments of ritual or of practices that help you to be in this practice of letting go of tiny griefs, please do let us know. Give us some insight on how to do this better. And yeah, let's keep the conversation going down in the comments. I will be in January of 2025 offering a deep dive through the 5 stages of grief as explored through the lens of the Reiki Precepts. I'm extremely excited about this class. It's work that my teaching apprentice has been working on for a very long time, and she and I are collaborating to create a ritual and educational experience for us to really explore our relationship with grief. And so if that is of interest to you, if you are watching this video prior to January 2025, that registration will still be live. I'll put it down below, and hopefully it goes well and we offer it again. So even if it's after then, check out the link and see what's going on over in Heartscapes. And as you go into your day from this conversation, as you move into this absolutely glorious right before winter afternoon, may you be deeply provisioned for whatever your day, whatever your life, whatever this season holds for you. Thanks so much for taking a few minutes out of your day with me. I appreciate you. Until next time, love you.